The thermometer read 30 degrees below zero, a temperature so cold that exposed skin freezes in minutes, a temperature where breathing hurts, a temperature that kills. And it was exactly at this moment that the world told Hazel Morrison she had to leave the only home she'd ever known. At 70 years old, with nowhere to go and only her loyal dog Jasper by her side, Hazel didn't beg for mercy from the town that had turned its back on her. Instead, she walked into the frozen forest, a forest she knew better than anyone alive. What she found there wasn't just shelter, it was a 400-year-old oak tree with a secret at its heart, a hollow sanctuary that had saved lives for centuries. And inside that ancient tree, Hazel would discover something that science thought was lost forever. Before we continue Hazel's incredible story, I want to ask you something. Do you believe that wisdom and knowledge are more powerful than money or youth? If stories of resilience, the bond between humans and nature, and impossible survival inspire you, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. We share powerful true stories every week about people who refuse to give up when the world gave up on them. Hit that like button so this story can reach someone who needs to remember that age brings wisdom, not weakness. Because what happened inside that hollow tree will change how you see survival, nature, and the strength of the human spirit. Now, let's go back to the moment when everything changed for Hazel and Jasper. December 18th, 2019, northern Minnesota. Hazel Morrison stood on the porch of the log cabin she'd built with her late husband 42 years ago, watching two men from North Star Development load documents into their briefcase. "You have until 5 p.m. today to vacate the property," the lead attorney said, not meeting her eyes. "After that, we'll be forced to involve law enforcement." Hazel looked at the man, young, maybe 35, wearing an expensive suit that seemed absurdly out of place in rural Minnesota. "You're throwing a 70-year-old woman out of her home in the middle of an Arctic blast. Do you understand that?" "Ma'am, this is a legal matter. The court has ruled. The property deed contains a clause that—" "I know what it contains," Hazel interrupted quietly. "I've read it 100 times. I also know that you found a technicality in a document from 1952 to steal land that's been in my family for 3 generations. You know it's wrong. That's why you can't look me in the eye." The attorney finally glanced up at her. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his face. But then it was gone, replaced by professional detachment. 5 p.m., Mrs. Morrison. I'm sorry." He got in his car and drove away, leaving Hazel alone with the reality of what was about to happen. She went back inside the cabin, her cabin, though apparently not anymore, and looked around. 42 years of memories. The kitchen where she and Robert had cooked together every evening. The living room where they'd read books by the fireplace. The bedroom where he died peacefully in his sleep 3 years ago, his hand in hers. The cabin was warm, heated by the wood stove she'd tended every winter for decades. Outside, the temperature was already dropping. The weather report that morning had been dire. An Arctic air mass was pushing down from Canada, bringing with it the coldest temperatures Minnesota had seen in 50 years. By tonight, it would be 30 below zero. By tomorrow morning, possibly 40 below. This wasn't just cruel, it was potentially lethal. Hazel had spent the last 3 months fighting the eviction. She'd hired a lawyer with money she didn't have. She'd presented evidence that the deed clause North Star was using had been invalidated by subsequent documents. But the judge, who she later learned had received campaign contributions from North Star, had ruled against her. She had no more legal options, no more money to fight with. And in 4 hours, she'd be homeless in the coldest weather of the century. "Jasper," she called, and her dog padded into the room. Jasper was an 8-year-old golden retriever mix. 70 pounds of loyal companionship. She'd found him as a puppy, abandoned on a hiking trail, and they'd been inseparable ever since. He'd helped her through Robert's death, through the lonely years after, through this nightmare eviction process. She sat down on the floor and put her arms around him. "We need to make a decision, boy. We can go to town, try to find a shelter that will take both of us. But you know they won't. They'll want to separate us. Put you in a kennel. Put me in... somewhere." Jasper leaned against her, his warmth and weight a comfort. Or, Hazel continued, we can go to the forest. I know a place, a safe place. It'll be hard, but we'll be together. She'd been a botanist for 45 years, specializing in the native flora of Minnesota's forests. She'd spent thousands of hours in the woods surrounding her property, cataloging species, studying ecosystems, hiking every trail and many places where there were no trails at all. She knew the forest better than anyone alive, and she knew something that might save them. Hazel stood up and began packing, not furniture or possessions. She couldn't carry much, and where she was going, material goods wouldn't matter. She packed survival essentials, her warmest winter clothing layered in a backpack, waterproof matches in a sealed container, a small hatchet, her field knife, a compact sleeping bag rated for extreme cold, a water bottle, high-calorie food bars, a first aid kit, her field notebook with decades of observations about the local flora. For Jasper, she packed dog food, a blanket that smelled like home, and a spare collar. She dressed in layers: thermal underwear, wool pants, a fleece shirt, a down vest, a heavy parka rated for 40 below, thick wool socks and insulated winter boots, a wool hat, a balaclava, and heavy gloves. She helped Jasper into his dog coat, a heavy insulated jacket she'd bought for him 2 winters ago. At 4:30 p.m., with the sun already setting and the temperature at -15 and falling, Hazel took one last look around her cabin. She thought about locking the door but decided against it. It wasn't hers anymore, apparently. She and Jasper walked out into the cold. The wind hit her like a physical blow. Even with all her layers, the cold found ways in, through the zipper of her coat, around the edges of her balaclava, anywhere skin was exposed. She'd called this morning to plead for an extension, explaining that the weather made eviction dangerous. The response had been cold. That's not our concern. You should have complied with the court order sooner. So be it. Hazel turned away from the driveway, away from the direction of town, and walked toward the forest. Jasper stayed close by her side, his breath already forming ice crystals in his fur. They entered the tree line as the last light faded from the sky. The forest in winter was a different world, beautiful but deadly. Snow crunched under Hazel's boots with each step, the sound seeming too loud in the cold silence. Her breath froze in the air, creating small clouds that lingered before dissipating. Even breathing was painful. The air was so cold it burned her lungs through the balaclava. She navigated by memory and instinct, following trails she'd walked hundreds of times. But in the dark, with snow covering familiar landmarks, even her extensive knowledge was tested. Jasper walked beside her, occasionally slightly ahead, his body pressed against her leg. Already ice was forming in his fur, especially around his muzzle where his breath froze. She stopped every 15 minutes to wipe the ice away, worried about frostbite on his nose and paws. The temperature continued to drop. -20, -25. The wind picked up, turning already brutal cold into something almost incomprehensible. Hazel knew the signs of hypothermia, had taught them to students for decades. Shivering was the first stage, her body trying to generate heat. Then came the mental effects. Confusion, poor decision-making, slowed thinking. She had to get to the tree before stage 2 set in. They walked for an hour, then 90 minutes. Hazel's legs were getting heavy, her movements slowing. Jasper was struggling too. She could see him limping slightly, one paw tender from the cold. The wind was relentless, cutting through her layers, finding every gap, stealing her body heat. Her face, despite the balaclava, had gone numb. Her fingers in her heavy gloves felt like frozen sticks. Keep moving, just keep moving. But she was getting disoriented. The darkness, the cold, the identical-looking trees. She thought she knew where she was, but doubt crept in. What if she'd taken a wrong turn? What if they were walking in circles? What if they never found it? Jasper suddenly stopped walking. He stood rigid, looking to the left, and let out a low whine. "What is it, boy?" He took 2 steps off the trail, then looked back at her expectantly. Hazel trusted Jasper's instincts. She followed him. They pushed through deeper snow between trees. No trail now. Hazel's legs trembled with exhaustion. Her thinking was getting fuzzy. definitely stage 2 hypothermia now. And then, through the blowing snow and darkness, she saw it, the sentinel oak. It appeared like a giant shadow against the slightly lighter sky, massive, ancient, towering over the surrounding forest. Even in her compromised state, Hazel felt a surge of relief so powerful it brought tears to her eyes, tears that immediately froze on her cheeks. They'd made it. The tree was perhaps 80 feet tall, with a trunk so wide it would take 4 people holding hands to encircle it. It was estimated to be 400 years old, one of the oldest oak trees in Minnesota, a survivor of centuries of storms and seasons, and 50 years ago it had been struck by lightning. The lightning had blasted through the center of the trunk, creating a hollow core while somehow leaving the outer layers alive. The tree had adapted, continuing to grow, its massive outer shell of living wood protecting the hollow heart. Hazel had discovered the hollow 20 years ago while doing a botanical survey. She documented it in her field notes, marveling at the tree's resilience and the unique microclimate inside the hollow. She'd never imagined she might someday need it to survive. The entrance to the hollow was on the east side, a natural opening about 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. Snow had drifted around the base, partially blocking it, but Hazel dropped to her knees and began digging with her gloved hands. Jasper helped, pawing at the snow, his instincts understanding what they needed to do. After 10 minutes of desperate work, the entrance was clear. Hazel looked into the dark opening. The hollow interior was invisible in the darkness, but she knew it was there, a chamber inside a living tree protected from the elements, insulated by thick bark and wood. "Come on, Jasper." Inside, the dog hesitated for just a moment, then crawled through the opening. Hazel followed, dragging her backpack behind her. As soon as she was through out of the wind, the difference was profound. Not warm, it was still well below freezing inside the hollow, but without the wind chill, without the constant assault of Arctic air, it felt almost bearable. Hazel lay on the ground just inside the entrance, shaking uncontrollably, gasping for breath. Jasper pressed against her, whining softly. "We made it," she whispered. "We made it, boy." But making it here was only the first step. Now came the real challenge, surviving the night in 30 below weather inside a hollow tree. Hazel forced herself to sit up and assess their shelter. She pulled out her flashlight and switched it on, revealing the interior of the hollow oak. The space was larger than she remembered, roughly circular, about 6 feet in diameter and perhaps 10 feet tall. The walls were the interior surface of the tree trunk, dark wood that had been carbonized by the lightning strike decades ago. The floor was hard-packed earth, covered with a layer of old, dry leaves and moss. The air inside was still and cold, but significantly warmer than outside. Hazel's botanical knowledge kicked in automatically. The thick bark and outer layers of living wood provided natural insulation. The tree itself, despite being hollow, was still alive. Its vascular system still moved water and nutrients through the outer layers. That living wood actually generated tiny amounts of heat through metabolic processes. Not much, but in these extreme conditions every degree mattered. The hollow was also protected from wind, which was crucial. Wind chill could make 30 below feel like 60 below. Here, sheltered inside the tree, the actual air temperature was what mattered. Hazel estimated it was perhaps 15 or 20 degrees warmer inside than outside, which meant it was probably -10 to -15 in here. Still cold enough to kill, if they didn't take more steps. "Okay, Jasper, we need to make this work." She began unpacking her backpack, taking inventory of what she had. Her hands were clumsy from the cold, her movements slow, but she forced herself to be methodical. First priority, insulation from the ground. The earth would steal body heat faster than the air. She spread her sleeping bag open on the floor, creating a layer between them and the cold ground. Second, sealing the entrance. The opening was allowing cold air to flow in. She needed to create a barrier without completely sealing them in. They needed some air circulation to avoid carbon dioxide buildup. She gathered loose bark from around the interior of the hollow and used it to create a partial barrier across the opening, leaving a gap at the top for air. Then she used moss, dry moss that had accumulated over the years inside the hollow to fill in the cracks. It wasn't perfect, but it significantly reduced the cold air flowing in. Third, water. She packed snow into her water bottle and tucked it inside her coat against her body. Her body heat would slowly melt it. It would take hours, but they'd need water. Fourth, food. She made herself eat 2 of the high-calorie bars, and she gave Jasper a large portion of his dog food. Their bodies needed fuel to generate heat. As she worked, Hazel explained everything to Jasper. She'd always talked to him during their hikes, explaining the plants they saw, the ecosystems they walked through. Now, she explained survival. The key is heat conservation, she told him, her voice sounding strange in the confined space. Our bodies generate heat through metabolism, burning calories to create energy, which produces heat as a byproduct. But we lose heat in several ways. Conduction through contact with cold surfaces. That's why we're on the sleeping bag instead of bare ground. Convection through cold air moving across our skin. That's why we sealed the entrance. Radiation, where our bodies emit infrared heat. That's why we need to stay close together, share our body heat. Jasper tilted his head, listening. You, my friend, have advantages I don't, Hazel continued. Your fur is incredible insulation, and your normal body temperature is higher than mine, about 101 to 102 degrees compared to my 98.6. That's going to be very important tonight. She finished her preparations and sat down on the sleeping bag, her back against the curved wall of the hollow. She pulled Jasper close, and he settled against her, his body providing significant warmth. Hazel wrapped her arms around him and felt her shivering gradually lessen. This could work. It had to work. As her body warmed slightly and her thinking cleared, Hazel took stock of their situation. They were alive and relatively safe for the moment, but they couldn't stay here indefinitely. She had food for maybe 3 days if they rationed carefully. Water would be the bigger challenge. Melting snow with body heat was inefficient, and eventually someone might come looking for her. North Star would report the property abandoned. Would anyone care enough to search? Would they think to look in the forest? She pushed those thoughts away. Right now, survival meant focusing on the immediate challenge, getting through this night. The temperature outside was still dropping. She could hear it in the sounds of the forest, the creak and groan of trees contracting in the extreme cold, the occasional sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot. Frost cracks. When temperatures dropped below -30, the moisture inside tree trunks could freeze and expand so rapidly that the trees literally exploded, their trunks splitting with sounds like rifle fire. But the sentinel oak, with its hollow core and thick outer walls, stood firm. It had survived 400 winters. It would survive this one, and so would they. As the night deepened and the temperature outside plummeted toward 40 below, Hazel tried to make their shelter more comfortable. The dry leaves and moss on the floor could provide additional insulation. She gathered them carefully, piling them around the edges of the sleeping bag, creating a nest-like structure. As she worked in the dim light of her flashlight, her hand brushed against something that didn't feel like leaves or moss, something hard and smooth. She directed the flashlight beam toward it. A stone, but not a natural stone. This one had been shaped, worked by human hands. It was roughly circular, about 4 inches across, made of white quartz with a slight translucence. Hazel picked it up, turning it over in her gloved hands. This hadn't gotten here naturally. Someone had brought it here. Someone had used this hollow as shelter before. She looked more carefully at the floor of the hollow, sifting through the accumulated leaves and debris. She found more. 3 more quartz stones, each about the same size. And something else. Dark chunks of what looked like hardened tree resin. Hazel's heart beat faster. She recognized what she was seeing. These were the components of a traditional fire-starting kit used by indigenous peoples of the region. Quartz stones for creating sparks. Dried resin as tinder and fuel. This hollow had been used as a shelter, perhaps for centuries, by people who knew the forest intimately. The Ojibwe people had lived in this region for thousands of years before European contact. They would have known about this tree, would have used it during hunting trips or when caught in storms. She directed her flashlight beam around the interior walls of the hollow, looking more carefully now. There, carved into the carbonized wood, faint but visible, symbols. Not random scratches, but deliberate markings. She recognized some of them from her studies. Pictographs indicating shelter, water, and safe haven. This tree wasn't just a natural formation. It was a known refuge, marked and maintained across generations. "Jasper, people have been surviving here for hundreds of years," she whispered. "We're part of a long tradition." The thought was oddly comforting. She wasn't alone in this struggle. Others had faced the brutal Minnesota winter and found safety in this exact spot. Hazel continued her careful excavation of the floor, wondering what else might be hidden in the accumulated debris of centuries. Her fingers, even through the gloves, were getting cold and clumsy, but she kept searching, and then she found it. Buried about 6 inches down in the old leaves and dirt, her hand touched metal. She carefully dug around it and pulled out a small metal box, maybe 4 inches by 6 inches, heavily tarnished but intact. It was a tobacco tin, the kind that was common in the late 1800s. There were faint words embossed on the lid, barely readable. Pioneer Tobacco Company, 1883. Hazel's hands trembled, from cold, but also from excitement. This tin had been here for over 130 years. She tried to open it, but the lid was stuck, rusted shut. She didn't want to force it and potentially damage whatever was inside. Instead, she used her knife carefully, working around the edge, gradually loosening the seal. After several minutes, the lid popped open. Inside, protected from moisture by the tin and the dry environment of the hollow, were several items. First, she saw seeds, dozens of them, in small paper packets that had been carefully folded and labeled in faded ink. Hazel picked up one packet carefully. The label read, Cypripedium reginae, Lady's Slipper, June 1882. Her breath caught. Cypripedium reginae was the showy lady's slipper, Minnesota's state flower. But these seeds had been collected in 1882, before widespread habitat destruction, before climate change, from genetic stock that might no longer exist in the wild. She opened another packet. Different seeds, different label. Trillium grandiflorum, large flowered trillium, May 1883. Packet after packet, each carefully labeled, each containing seeds of native plants. This was a seed collection. Someone, a botanist perhaps, or an amateur naturalist, had been collecting and preserving seeds of native Minnesota plants in the 1880s. Beneath the seed packets was a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellowed and fragile. Hazel opened it carefully. The first page had a name written in elegant script. Eleanor Whitmore, Field Notes, 1881, 1884. Hazel's hands trembled as she turned the pages. This was a botanical journal, filled with observations, sketches, and notes about the native flora of the region. One entry, dated September 1882, caught her eye. Today, I took shelter from an early snowstorm in the great hollow oak tree that the Ojibwe call Manitou Mitig, spirit tree. The interior is surprisingly warm and dry, protected from the wind. I have marked this location in my maps as a safe refuge. Future travelers should know of this sanctuary. I have left a collection of seeds here, protected in a metal tin. Should these ever be found, I hope they will be of use to future botanists. I have collected specimens of plants that are becoming increasingly rare due to agricultural expansion. Perhaps in time they may be propagated and returned to the wild. Hazel read the entry again, tears forming in her eyes. Eleanor Whitmore, a botanist from the 1880s, had sat in this exact spot, seeking shelter from a storm, just as Hazel was now. She'd left these seeds as a gift to the future, hope preserved in paper and tin, and now, 137 years later, another botanist had found them. The discovery of Eleanor Whitmore's seeds and journal gave Hazel a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving. She was part of a continuum, a chain of people who had loved and studied this forest across centuries. But survival still required immediate practical action. The temperature continued to drop. Outside, it was now approaching -35, with wind chill making it feel like -50 or worse. Inside the hollow, Hazel estimated it was perhaps -5 to -10, cold enough to be dangerous over extended periods, but manageable with the right techniques. She needed to optimize their heat conservation. Every degree mattered. Hazel had Jasper lie down on the sleeping bag, then she lay down beside him, pressing her back against his chest and belly. She pulled the top half of the sleeping bag over both of them, creating a shared cocoon. Then she arranged her parka over that, adding another layer of insulation. The effect was immediate and significant. Jasper's body heat radiated against her back. Their combined body heat was trapped in the small space under the sleeping bag and parka. The temperature in their little cocoon began to rise. "Good boy, Jasper," she murmured. "You're keeping us alive." She could feel him breathing. His heart beat steady and strong against her back. His fur was thick and dry now that they were out of the wind and snow. He'd stopped shivering. As her body warmed slightly, Hazel's mind became clearer. She thought through their situation systematically, applying decades of scientific training. Immediate threats, hypothermia and frostbite, both were being managed through insulation and shared body heat. Status: acceptable for now. Secondary threats: dehydration and caloric depletion. She had food and could melt snow for water using body heat. Status: manageable for at least 48 hours. Longer-term threats: exposure over extended period, potential rescue complications, legal situation regarding the property. Status: unknown but requiring eventual action. Her biggest advantage was knowledge. She understood the physiology of cold weather survival. She understood the ecosystem of the forest. She understood the unique properties of this tree. The sentinel oak was providing more than just physical shelter. The living wood of the outer trunk was actually metabolically active, even in winter. Trees don't fully shut down in cold weather. They go dormant, but their cells remain alive. Their vascular system still transports small amounts of water and nutrients. That biological activity generates tiny amounts of heat. In normal temperatures, that heat is negligible, lost immediately to the environment. But in the insulated space of the hollow, with the entrance sealed and her body heat trapped, every small heat source combined to create a survivable microclimate. It was, Hazel reflected, rather like being inside a living thermos. She explained all this to Jasper, partly to organize her own thoughts, partly because talking to him was comforting, and partly because she suspected he understood more than people gave him credit for. "You and I are a team, boy," she said softly. "Your fur, your body heat, you're contributing critical resources, and I'm contributing knowledge and hands that can manipulate tools. Together, we're greater than the sum of our parts." Jasper made a soft sound, somewhere between a whine and a sigh, and pressed closer against her. As the hours passed, Hazel dozed intermittently, never fully sleeping. It was too cold and too dangerous to sleep deeply. She maintained awareness, checking periodically that her extremities had feeling, that Jasper was breathing normally, that their cocoon was maintaining its warmth. Outside, the sounds of the forest at extreme cold were otherworldly. Trees groaned and creaked as their wood contracted. Occasionally she heard the sharp crack of a frost split, a tree trunk explosively fracturing from the expansion of frozen sap. Each time she heard one, Hazel felt grateful for the sentinel oak's hollow structure. The hollow core meant there was no continuous column of wood, filled with sap that could expand and crack. The tree's ancient injury had made it uniquely suited to survive these extreme conditions. Around what she estimated was 3 a.m., the coldest part of the night, Hazel heard something different. A series of loud cracks, multiple trees failing almost simultaneously, followed by the crash of falling timber. Jasper tensed against her, whimpering slightly. "It's okay," she told him, though her heart was racing. "We're safe here. The sentinel protects us." The sounds continued for several minutes, a symphony of destruction as the extreme cold took its toll on younger, weaker trees. But through it all, the massive oak stood firm, its 400-year-old trunk unyielding. As dawn approached and the darkest, coldest hours finally passed, Hazel allowed herself to feel a cautious optimism. They'd survived the night. Both of them were alive and relatively healthy. She'd need to reassess their situation in daylight, make decisions about whether to try to signal for help or wait for temperatures to moderate. But for now, in this moment, they were okay. She pressed closer against Jasper's warmth and whispered, "We made it through, boy. We're going to be okay." As the first grey light of dawn began to filter through the cracks around the entrance, Hazel heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A prolonged, thunderous crack, louder than any before, followed by a crash that shook the ground. This wasn't a frost crack. This was something bigger. Jasper scrambled to his feet, barking, and Hazel quickly grabbed his collar to keep him from bolting toward the entrance. "Easy, boy. Stay calm." Another crack, then another. The forest around them seemed to be coming apart. Hazel's mind raced through possibilities. What could cause multiple large trees to fail simultaneously? And then she understood. The temperature must have dropped even further during the last hours before dawn, reaching what meteorologists called a threshold event, a point where even healthy, mature trees couldn't withstand the stress. What she was hearing was a cascade failure. As one large tree fell, it struck others, weakening them, causing them to fail in turn, like dominoes made of frozen wood, falling in sequence. She and Jasper were in the center of it. A massive crash, closer than the others, made the interior of the hollow vibrate. Jasper pressed against her, trembling. Hazel forced herself to think calmly. They were safe inside the sentinel oak. Its hollow structure actually made it more resilient, not less. The thick outer shell of living wood was flexible enough to withstand what solid trees couldn't, and its massive size meant it would take something extraordinary to bring it down. But the falling trees created a new danger. If one fell directly onto their tree, if something blocked the entrance, they could be trapped inside. She needed to assess the situation. Carefully, she moved to the entrance and pulled away some of her improvised barrier, creating a small opening to look through. The dawn light revealed a scene of devastation. 3 large trees, pines and birches, had fallen in a rough circle around the sentinel oak. One had fallen close enough that its upper branches were touching the oak's trunk. Snow had been thrown up by the impacts, creating clouds that still hung in the air. Broken branches and shattered wood littered the ground, but the sentinel stood untouched, its massive trunk unmoved by the chaos around it. Hazel felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, awe, and something almost like love for this ancient tree that had protected them. As she watched, another tree fell, a birch about 100 feet away, its trunk splitting with a sound like a gunshot before toppling. The crash sent up another cloud of snow and ice crystals that caught the low dawn light, creating a momentary rainbow in the frozen air. It was terrifying. It was also, Hazel had to admit, beautiful in its own terrible way. This was nature at its most extreme, most powerful. This was the forest responding to cold beyond what most living things could endure. And she and Jasper were surviving it, sheltered inside a tree that had already survived 4 centuries of such tests. She watched for perhaps 20 minutes as the cascade of failures gradually subsided. The extreme cold that caused it remained, but the weakest trees had already fallen. The survivors, including the sentinel oak, had proven their resilience. Finally, the forest fell silent again, the only sound the whisper of wind through the remaining trees. Hazel rebuilt her barrier across the entrance and returned to Jasper. "The worst is over," she told him. "We just need to hold on a little longer." She checked her supplies. Food and water were running low. She had maybe 1 more day of food for both of them if she rationed strictly. Water was the bigger concern. She'd melted only a small amount of snow, and both of them were getting dehydrated. She needed to make a decision. Stay in the hollow and hope temperatures rose enough to make it safe to travel, or try to signal for help somehow. Before she could decide, she heard something new. A sound so faint she almost missed it. A mechanical sound. An engine. Snowmobiles. Multiple of them from the sound. Coming closer. Someone was in the forest. Someone was searching. The sound of snowmobile engines grew closer, then seemed to pass by, moving away. They were searching, but they didn't know where to look. Hazel needed to signal them somehow, but she couldn't leave the hollow. The temperature was still life-threatening outside. despite the sun being up, and she couldn't risk exposing Jasper to that cold. She rummaged through her backpack, looking for anything that might help. Her flashlight, if she could reflect sunlight. But then the engines faded entirely, moving toward a different section of forest. Whoever was searching had moved on. Hazel sat back, frustrated. She'd missed her chance. Jasper whined softly, sensing her distress. "It's okay, boy. They'll come back, or we'll figure something else out." To distract herself from the disappointment, Hazel returned her attention to Eleanor Whitmore's journal. She'd only read a few entries in the night. Now, with daylight filtering through the cracks in the entrance providing natural light, she could read more carefully. Eleanor's observations were remarkably detailed. She documented not just plant species, but their ecological relationships, their uses by indigenous peoples, their responses to environmental changes even in the 1880s. One entry particularly caught Hazel's attention. July 1883. "I have discovered a population of Cypripedium regini, showy lady's slipper orchid, in the marsh south of Manitou Meetig. This population appears robust, perhaps 200 individual plants. However, I fear for their future. The drainage projects proposed by the timber companies would destroy their habitat within 5 years. I have collected seeds from multiple plants and will preserve them. Should these marshes be destroyed, perhaps someday these seeds might restore what was lost." Hazel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The showy lady's slipper was Minnesota's state flower, but it had become increasingly rare. Populations had declined by over 80% since the 1800s, due to habitat destruction and collection by enthusiasts. The seeds in Eleanor's tin were from a time before that decline. They represented genetic diversity that might not exist anywhere else. They were potentially priceless from a conservation perspective. Hazel carefully examined the seed packets. There were 7 different species represented, each with multiple packets, each packet carefully labeled with collection date and location. Beyond the lady's slipper, there were seeds of large-flowered Trillium ram's head lady slipper, even rarer than the showy yellow lady slipper prairie white fringed orchid small white lady's slipper western prairie fringed orchid. Every single one of these species was now rare, threatened, or endangered. Some were on federal protected lists, and here, preserved in a tin for 137 years, were seeds that could potentially restore lost genetic diversity. Hazel's hands trembled as she realized what she was holding. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. This was a treasure trove of biological significance. Eleanor Whitmore had left a gift not just to future botanists, but to the ecosystem itself, a time capsule of genetic material from before industrialization, before habitat destruction, before climate change. And Hazel had found it. More than that, she was in a unique position to do something with it. She was a trained botanist with 45 years of experience. She had the knowledge to propagate these seeds, to work with conservation organizations to help restore populations of these rare plants. Eleanor's hope, expressed in her journal entry, could actually be fulfilled. But first, Hazel needed to survive long enough to bring these seeds back to the world. She carefully repacked the tin, sealing it as best she could, and tucked it into an inner pocket of her parka. Whatever happened, she would protect these seeds. They represented hope, Eleanor's hope from 137 years ago, and her own hope now. "Jasper," she said quietly, "we're not just surviving anymore. We have a mission. We need to get these seeds to people who can use them. We need to carry Eleanor's gift forward." Jasper tilted his head, listening. "That means we need to be smart about this. We can't take unnecessary risks. We need to wait for the right moment, the right conditions." She checked her supplies again. Food for perhaps 12 more hours. Water nearly gone. The temperature outside was probably still around -25 to -30, but the sun was up, which meant it might moderate to -20 or so by afternoon. If the search party came back, if she could signal them somehow, they might be rescued today. If not, she'd need to make the difficult decision about whether to try traveling back to town tomorrow or to wait even longer. The sound of snowmobile engines returned, closer this time. This was their chance. Hazel grabbed her flashlight and moved to the entrance. She needed to signal them, but how? The snowmobile engines were close now, perhaps only a few hundred yards away. Hazel could hear voices calling, searchers yelling her name. She had only moments to act. The barrier she'd built across the entrance blocked most light from inside, making the hollow invisible from outside. The fallen trees around the sentinel oak created visual confusion, making it even harder to spot the entrance. She pulled away the barrier quickly, letting daylight flood in. Then she took her flashlight and began signaling with it, flashing it on and off in a pattern. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. The universal distress signal. She did it again and again. "Here!" she tried to yell, but her voice was weak, rough from the cold and dehydration. "We're here!" The engine sounds changed direction. They were coming toward her. Jasper began barking, a sound that carried farther than Hazel's voice. 2 minutes later, a snowmobile appeared through the trees, followed by another, then a third. The lead driver saw the flashing light and the opening in the massive oak trunk and headed directly toward them. The snowmobile stopped 20 feet from the tree. The driver, a man in full Arctic gear with a rescue service patch on his jacket, dismounted and approached cautiously. "Mrs. Morrison? Hazel Morrison?" "Yes," Hazel called back. "We're in here. We're okay." The rescuer reached the entrance and looked inside, his expression showing shock at finding her alive. "Ma'am, we've been searching since dawn. The temperature last night reached -38. How are you alive?" 400 years of oak tree," Hazel replied with a tired smile. "And a good dog." More rescuers arrived. They brought blankets, hot liquids from thermoses, emergency heat packs. They checked both Hazel and Jasper for frostbite and hypothermia, amazed to find both in remarkably good condition. "We expected to be recovering a body," one of them admitted quietly. "No one thought you could survive a night like that." "I had advantages," Hazel said. "Knowledge, preparation, and this tree." She insisted on collecting her belongings carefully, especially making sure Eleanor Whitmore's tin was secure. When one of the rescuers asked what was so important about an old tobacco tin, Hazel simply said, "Seeds, very important seeds." They loaded her and Jasper onto a snowmobile, equipped with a rescue sled, wrapped them in insulated blankets, and began the journey back to town. As they pulled away, Hazel looked back at the sentinel oak. In daylight, with the surrounding destruction of fallen trees, it stood even more majestically. A survivor, a protector, a sanctuary that had saved lives across centuries. "Thank you," she whispered to the tree. The ride back to town took 30 minutes. By the time they arrived, word had spread. A crowd had gathered, media, concerned citizens, and representatives from North Star Development, looking decidedly uncomfortable. The story had become local news. Elderly woman forced out of her home in Arctic conditions, missing overnight, presumed dead. The public reaction had been fierce, with outrage directed at both North Star and the court system that had enabled the eviction. When Hazel emerged from the rescue sled, very much alive and accompanied by her loyal dog, the crowd erupted in cheers. She was taken to the hospital for evaluation. Despite spending a night in -38-degree weather, she was in remarkably good condition. Mild dehydration, very minor frostbite on 2 fingertips. Otherwise, healthy. "You have knowledge that saved your life," the doctor told her. "Most people wouldn't have survived. They would have panicked, made poor decisions, or simply not known what to do." "I've spent my whole life studying the forest," Hazel replied. "It was time for the forest to teach me something in return." Over the next week, several things happened quickly. First, North Star Development announced they were re-evaluating their development plans and offered to sell Hazel's property back to her for the original value. The public outcry and negative publicity had made the project untenable. Second, Hazel contacted the University of Minnesota's Department of Plant Biology and shared Eleanor Whitmore's seeds and journal. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. The seeds represented genetic material thought lost to time. Conservation biologists wanted to start propagation immediately. Third, environmental organizations, learning about both Eleanor's legacy and Hazel's survival in the sentinel oak, began a campaign to protect the forest. Within 3 months, the area was designated as a protected natural preserve, the Eleanor Whitmore Hazel Morrison Nature Sanctuary. The Sentinel Oak became the centerpiece of the preserve, with an educational trail leading to it and a small plaque explaining its history as a shelter across centuries. 6 months later, on a warm June day, Hazel stood before the Sentinel Oak again, this time with a crowd of supporters, officials, and botanists. She was dedicating the preserve officially, but more importantly, she was planting the first propagated seedlings from Eleanor Whitmore's seeds. Showy lady slipper orchids, grown from seeds collected in 1882, being returned to the forest where they'd once thrived. Eleanor Whitmore saved these seeds, hoping they'd be useful someday, Hazel said to the gathered crowd. She sheltered in this tree and left a gift for the future. That gift waited 137 years to be found, and when it was found, it was by someone who also needed shelter, who also found safety in this remarkable tree. She knelt and carefully planted a seedling in the prepared soil near the oak's massive roots. This is a gift returned, Eleanor's legacy continuing forward, and this preserve ensures that future generations will have both the plants and the shelter that saved my life. Jasper sat beside her wearing a bandana that said, Honorary Forest Ranger, watching the proceedings with the quiet dignity of a dog who knows he's very good. After the ceremony, Hazel gave a tour of the hollow oak interior to a group of botanists and students. She showed them the carved symbols on the walls, explained the thermal properties of the living wood, demonstrated how the hollow created a protected microclimate. This tree taught me something I'd forgotten, she told them. I'd spent my whole life studying individual species, cataloging plants, understanding them in isolation. But this experience reminded me that ecosystems are about relationships. The tree sheltered me. I'll protect the tree. Eleanor preserved seeds. I'll propagate them. We're all connected across time, across species, across life and death. One of the students raised her hand. What happened to your cabin? Did you move back? Hazel smiled. Actually, something better. The town felt so guilty about what happened that they offered me a new place. There's a small house right at the edge of the preserve now, the ranger's house. I'm the official guardian of the Eleanor Whitmore Hazel Morrison Sanctuary. I get to spend every day in the forest I love, with Jasper, protecting this place and teaching others about it. And the seeds? Another student asked. We've successfully propagated all 7 species, Hazel replied. Next spring we'll plant more. The year after, more still. Eleanor's populations will be restored. The genetic diversity she preserved will be returned to the wild. In maybe 10 years you'll be able to walk through this preserve and see orchids that haven't grown here since before your great-grandparents were born. She looked up at the Sentinel Oak towering above them. This tree has stood here for 400 years. It's sheltered countless lives, native peoples, Eleanor Whitmore, me and Jasper. And it will stand for centuries more, protecting the forest, providing sanctuary for whoever needs it. That evening, back at her small house on the preserve's edge, Hazel sat on the porch with Jasper beside her, watching the sun set over the forest. She thought about that terrible night when she'd been forced out with nowhere to go. She'd walked into the forest expecting to simply survive, to endure until something better came along. But the forest had given her more than survival. It had given her purpose. It had connected her to Eleanor Whitmore across 137 years. It had reminded her that knowledge and wisdom have value, that age brings capabilities the young can't match, that every life, human, dog, tree, is interconnected. You know what the best part is, Jasper, she said to her dog. When they threw us out, they thought we were disposable. An old woman and an old dog, no longer useful to society. But we proved them wrong. We survived what they thought would kill us. We found something they didn't know existed, and now we're protecting a forest that will outlive all of them. Jasper leaned against her leg, warm and solid and loyal. We're not disposable, Hazel continued quietly. We're essential. Every elder holds wisdom. Every life has purpose. They just need the chance to prove it. She pulled Eleanor Whitmore's journal from her pocket. She carried it with her always now, and opened to a passage she'd marked, I wonder who will find these seeds. I wonder what the world will be like when they're discovered. Will the forests still stand? Will the plants I'm preserving still exist in the wild? Or will these seeds be the last remnants of something lost? I hope whoever finds them understands what they represent. Hope. Not just hope for these specific plants, but hope that knowledge can be preserved, that gifts can cross generations, that even when we're gone, we can still help those who come after. The Manitou Mitig spirit tree has sheltered me today. Perhaps it will shelter the finder of these seeds as well. Perhaps this old oak will connect us across time, two botanists who loved this forest and wanted to protect it. Hazel closed the journal, tears on her cheeks. You were right, Eleanor. The tree did shelter me, and I found your gift, and I understand what it represents. I'll carry your work forward, I promise. The sun set completely, and the first stars appeared in the clear sky. The temperature was dropping. It was still winter after all, but Hazel was warm in her house, safe and secure, with Jasper by her side, and a purpose that gave meaning to every day. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived. An old woman and her dog had beaten impossible odds, discovered a treasure, and changed the future of an entire ecosystem. Not bad for someone the world thought was disposable. If Hazel's story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share powerful true stories every week about resilience, the wisdom that comes with age, and the incredible things people can accomplish when they refuse to give up. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? Have you witnessed someone use knowledge and experience to overcome impossible odds? Share your story. Someone reading might need the encouragement today. Hazel Morrison teaches us profound truths about value, wisdom, and survival. She teaches us that age doesn't diminish capability, it enhances it. Her 45 years as a botanist gave her knowledge that saved her life. Her decades of experience in the forest told her where to find shelter. Her scientific training helped her understand the thermal dynamics that kept her alive. A younger person, without that accumulated wisdom, would have died. She teaches us about the continuity of knowledge across generations. Eleanor Whitmore preserved seeds in 1883, hoping they'd be useful someday. Hazel found them in 2019 and used them to restore lost ecosystems. Knowledge, properly preserved, becomes a gift to the future. Most importantly, Hazel teaches us that what society discards often has the most value. They forced her out thinking she was expendable, a burden, someone who no longer contributed. But she proved that wisdom, experience, and dedication matter more than youth or wealth. She found something that scientists thought was lost forever. She connected past and future. She protected a forest that will serve countless people across coming centuries. For anyone who's been told they're too old, too slow, no longer useful, remember Hazel. Remember that she survived conditions that would kill most people. Remember that she made a discovery that changed conservation biology. Remember that when the world tried to throw her away, she proved she was essential. Age brings wisdom. Experience brings capability. Knowledge compounds across decades. Hazel Morrison, at 70 years old, accomplished what few could at any age, and she did it with a loyal dog, a 400-year-old tree, and seeds preserved by another woman who understood that gifts can cross centuries. Thank you for joining us for Hazel's incredible journey. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their years bring strength, not weakness. And remember, the people society tries to discard are often the ones with the most to give. We'll see you in the next story.